For 2 decades, the world's most wanted terrorist stayed one step ahead. He bombed, he killed, he vanished. In 1975, he stormed a high-profile meeting in Europe. 60 high-level officials taken hostage, 3 dead, and a getaway so bold it shocked the world. Mossad, CIA, KGB, Interpol. No one could catch him. Some called him a revolutionary, others a monster. But to the world, he was something else. Carlos the Jackal. This is his story. He wasn't born a terrorist, he was made into one. Ilich Ramirez Sanchez, born in Venezuela, 1949. His father, a Marxist lawyer, raised him on communist ideals, named him after Lenin, taught him revolution was noble, violence, sometimes necessary. As a young man, Ilich was smart, charismatic, ambitious. He left home to study at Moscow's Patrice Lumumba University, a school known for training revolutionaries. But even in Moscow, he stood out, too radical, too unpredictable, expelled. By the early 1970s, he found himself in the Middle East, drawn to a new cause, the Palestinian struggle. In Beirut, he joined the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, not as a political activist, as a fighter. He trained with commandos, learned bomb-making, close-quarters combat, disguises. He wasn't there to march, he was there to kill. By 1973, Europe was his new battlefield. Paris, London, The Hague, embassies, banks, airlines. No targets were off limits. He attacked those he saw as enemies of Palestine. And he signed no name, left no trace. But in the underground, among militants and contacts, he used one name again and again: Carlos. That was the name whispered in the files. The name passed between agents. His real identity, Ilich Ramirez Sanchez, was still a mystery, but the man they hunted was Carlos. That year, he tried to assassinate Joseph Seif, a wealthy Jewish businessman in London, a close-range shot to the face. But Seif survived. Carlos slipped away, undetected. Later, French police raided one of his safe houses. Inside, they found weapons, explosives, fake passports, and a copy of the novel, The Day of the Jackal. It was the press who put the pieces together. Carlos the Jackal. And just like that, the myth was born, a name that would soon terrify Europe. By the mid-1970s, Carlos was already a wanted man. But what came next would make him world famous. December 21st, 1975. Vienna, Austria. A cold winter morning. Inside the OPEC headquarters, the oil ministers of 13 nations were gathered. It was supposed to be a secure meeting. Armed guards at the entrance. Diplomats inside. But Carlos had other plans. He arrived with a 6-man team. Their weapons? Hidden in gym bags. Rifles, grenades, explosives. Their cover? Business attire. Normal. Forgettable. At exactly 10:30 a.m. they struck. Carlos led the charge. His men burst through the doors. Fast. Controlled. Shots fired into the air. A grenade thrown. Not to kill, but to shock. Panic. Confusion. Guards overwhelmed. In minutes, Carlos and his team had full control of the conference floor. Dozens of oil ministers, their aides, journalists, forced to the ground, at gunpoint. Carlos moved among them, calm, deliberate. Then came the demands. A public broadcast, calling for the liberation of Palestine, release of Palestinian prisoners, an Arab oil embargo against Israel and its allies, and one more demand, though never spoken openly: money. Behind the scenes, Arab governments were contacted. It's believed that more than $20 million in secret payments were arranged to ensure the safe release of the ministers. For 16 hours, the world watched in disbelief. Vienna surrounded by police and soldiers. But no one dared move. 3 men were killed, including a Libyan delegate. executed by Carlos to prove he was serious. Finally, at dawn, the Austrian government made a compromise. They agreed to pay the ransom, they would provide a fueled plane, and they would broadcast Carlos's political message live on the radio. But there would be no release of Palestinian prisoners, and no embargo on Israel. Carlos had won headlines, not full victory. Still, the deal was made. A DC-9 jet was prepared. Carlos and his team marched their hostages to the plane. First stop, Algiers. There, some hostages were released. But Carlos wasn't finished. The plane flew again, this time to Tripoli, Libya. And when the last hostages were freed, Carlos and his men simply disappeared. No arrests, no trace. But his legend had only grown. Carlos the Jackal, the most wanted terrorist in the world. The hunt was on. Across Europe and the Middle East, his face was everywhere. Interpol, CIA, Mossad, French intelligence, German police. Everyone wanted Carlos the Jackal, but no one could catch him. Because Carlos wasn't hiding in a basement. He was protected by governments who saw him as an asset. In a world divided by the Cold War, Carlos was a weapon, and some countries wanted him on their side. He moved between safe houses in East Germany, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, given new passports, weapons, money. In return, he served their interests, striking targets in the West. Each time a lead surfaced, Carlos was already gone, sometimes in Beirut, sometimes Baghdad, sometimes Damascus. He was a ghost. But ghosts still left scars. But Carlos didn't stop at OPEC. Over the next decade, Europe burned. Embassies were bombed. Diplomats were gunned down. Rocket attacks hit El Al planes. Grenades exploded in cafes, airports, offices. 1974, a bomb tore through the drugstore Saint-Germain in Paris. 2 killed, dozens wounded. 1975, rocket launchers aimed at Israeli jets in Orly Airport. Missed. But the message was clear. And between each attack, Carlos slipped away. Untouchable, elusive, a ghost. But a ghost still making war. In 1982, his lover, Magdalena Kopp, was arrested in Paris. Carlos struck back. Not with words, with bombs. A TGV train, a Paris station, an office building, 11 dead, over 100 wounded. France was shaken. The message was clear. No one touched Carlos without consequences. But with every attack, the pressure grew. Western agencies stepped up the hunt. And in the East, patience was wearing thin. By the late 1980s, everything was changing. Old alliances breaking. The Iron Curtain cracking. Czechoslovakia, Hungary, East Germany. One by one, the doors closed. And for the first time, Carlos was running out of places to hide. By the early 1990s, the map had changed. The Cold War was ending. Eastern Europe was no longer safe. One by one, Carlos lost his protectors. First Czechoslovakia, then Hungary, then East Germany. The Iron Curtain had fallen, and with it, the walls that had kept him hidden. Only a few allies remained, one of them, Syria. In Damascus, Carlos found refuge, a new identity, a new wife, Magdalena Kopp, a daughter. But the net was tightening. The world was smaller now. Old friends were watching their own backs. In 1991, Syria made it clear. Carlos was no longer welcome. Too dangerous. Too public. He had to leave. There weren't many places left to run. He chose Sudan. Khartoum. A quiet life, on the surface. But Western intelligence was watching. The CIA, the French DST, tracking his movements, following the money. And by 1994, they were closing in. August 1994, Khartoum, Sudan. Carlos the Jackal had been on the run for more than 20 years, but time changes everything. Allies fade, deals break. And now, even in Sudan, he was no longer safe. The French intelligence service DST had tracked him for months. The CIA shared what they knew. Together, they built a plan, Not an arrest, an operation. The French moved first. A secret team flew into Khartoum. Quiet, unofficial. Carlos had no idea they were coming. At dawn, they hit. Inside his villa, Carlos was caught off guard. No time to fight. No time to run. Some say he was shot in the groin during the struggle. Sedated, bound, and smuggled out of the country on a private jet. No press, no cameras, no trial, just a flight straight to Paris, where the most wanted man in the world was finally in chains. In Paris, for the first time in decades, Carlos was no longer a ghost. He stood in a courtroom, older, heavier, but still defiant. He called himself a professional revolutionary, claimed his attacks were acts of war, not terrorism. The judges didn't agree. In 1997, Carlos was convicted of 3 murders from his earliest days in Paris, sentenced to life in prison. But the trials weren't over. As new evidence surfaced, old cases reopened: bombings, assassinations, civilian deaths. 2011, another life sentence. 2017, a third life sentence added. Each time, Carlos stood in court, unrepentant. He gave interviews from prison, still praising revolution, still denying regret. But outside those walls, the world had changed. The Cold War was long over. The states that once protected him, gone. And the myth of Carlos the Jackal was no longer a weapon, just a memory. He built a legend. One bomb, one bullet, one headline at a time. He used the Cold War like a shield, played nations against each other. And for 20 years, it worked. But time changes everything. Allies vanish, borders shift, and even the most wanted man runs out of places to run. Today, Carlos the Jackal sits behind bars, serving 3 life sentences. The man who once shook Europe is now locked away forever.